Hey, friends, and welcome to day 2 of the writing camp. We're talking today about your audience awakens, writing with your reader in mind. A couple of thoughts before we get in. One is I think that there's different reasons why we write, and not all of us write for a specific audience, especially if we are trying to communicate an idea for an audience. Um, not all of us are doing that. Sometimes we're just writing purely for ourselves. We are the audience. And other people may end up reading it too. We may end up publishing it and sharing it, but we're actually writing it for us. And I think there's a good place for that. We may not even publish these kinds of things. We might just sort of share them, put them on a blog, self-publish just for ourselves or for a little gift or something. So that can be very valuable and important and meaningful. And then there's the other side, perhaps, where you do write for an audience, where you are trying to perhaps share an idea, help them to see something the way that you see something, just have fun and craft something for a specific group of people. Now, here's the difference. One is the reason why this matters so much to me is because if we're faith inspired fiction authors, there are plenty of opportunities where we live in close knit communities, maybe our parish, and we're talking about the fact that we're writing things, and your parish is going, well, you shouldn't be able to write that, or you shouldn't be talking about that, or you should include this or that topic in what it is you're crafting. And everybody's telling you, you should. And you're just, you really want to write your own thing. And you may even get to a point where you'd stop talking to people about the stories that you want to be creating, the stories that you're writing, because they're just not getting it, and then they're wanting you to craft stuff that they want. So I would like to offer you the permission, whoever you are, whatever kind of story that you're writing, first of all, allow yourself to disconnect from whatever anybody else wants you to be creating. They're not actually you. They're not actually authors, and they don't have this burning idea or this fun story or this dramatic thing that you want to tell. So first, allow them to have all of their own opinions, and maybe they're valuable, maybe they're not, maybe they're helpful, maybe they're not. So two, if you do decide this story that I want to tell is meant for a specific kind of audience. And it can actually be very helpful to identify this ahead of time, not just for marketing purposes, but also for attention purposes. So, for example, a friend always used to tell me that knowing your audience is so important for pairing the right kind of content. Like even we do this in schoolwork. So, for example, the Song of Songs in sacred scripture is not something, it's not appropriate for a room of maybe 13-year-olds, or Hamlet, right? Hamlet is not a great play for a classroom of manic depressives, right? It's fantastic source material, wrong audience, or at least at the wrong stage in their journey. So, looking at your story and recognizing, I know who would probably enjoy and would want to read this sort of thing. And then knowing that, you can now get a sense of permission to know not how far is too far, but what are things that you would want to include that would make your story feel more grounded, more authentic, more real, that would have a better connection with an audience. Um, let's say that you're writing some kind of a young adult thriller. So you may decide this audience of people who like young adult thrillers are watching these kinds of movies, they're reading these kinds of books, they're going to expect these sorts of things in the story. And heck, I want to write these kinds of things in the story. So instead of wondering, is my local parish community going to approve of this? Are my, let's say, parents, if you're younger, are they going to approve of this? Are my friends, and so on? There's a point, I think, where you need to take a step back and look at, am I creating this for them? And if they step up and they decide, this is not good, I'm not liking this, this is not, a good idea, you shouldn't be doing this. I think it's an important space to be able to hold for yourself, to go, I didn't write it for you. I didn't craft it for you. One major reason why I think this can be very helpful, and one of the reasons why we're having this writing camp, is to talk about this together and see what you think. But here's why I think this is so helpful, is because it gives you the permission to be as real with your characters as you want to be. And I think this is a challenge a lot of us faith-inspired fiction authors run into. We we want to create these morally idealistic characters, um, or we're not sure how far to hold the line when somebody is being morally ambiguous or perhaps an anti-hero or bad. We know at some point that we want some sort of a conversion, but we're half thinking in the back of my mind, my goodness, if so and so were to ever read this, they would write me off, or we'd have massive arguments, and so on. And then just to realize this story makes sense to you in a specific way. And maybe you owe it to the story and to yourself to write it through and figure it out and just explore that story. Maybe it doesn't have to be perfect. Karen Yulo wrote a amazing book called Jennifer the Damned, which is now one of my favorite little examples. When I chatted with her on the channel, she talked about how she crafted this story of a young girl who's raised by nuns and then who awakens and becomes a vampire. And it can be seen as a metaphor for being a human dealing with concupiscence, dealing with an attraction for evil, and not sure how to navigate that, and living in a community of people who sort of get it but don't really get it. And she's got to consume blood. And so, very dramatic kind of story. Well, as it turns out, parish priest reached out to her and said, I am recommending this book in the confessional for teens dealing with addiction issues. She thought when she said she was writing this story that those would be the last people who would enjoy or get into a story like this, because it would be so direct and so visceral and perhaps triggering. And it turns out she was so real and authentic to the darkness and the grittiness of the character that the people going through those things resonated with that story and that character so closely that they actually got a benefit from it. Knowing your characters, knowing your story, knowing what it is that you want to do, and recognizing that your audience is going through these similar sorts of things, to hold back on the reality of specific situations. And again, it could be serious things, could be positive things, could be real life things. Holding back because you're afraid of offending another audience that the story was never intended for is not going to go over as well with your actual audience. And I mean, I imagine you can look at novels that you've read yourself, or stories that you've read, or movies you've watched in the past, where you recognize that's not true, that's not as authentic, that's not really bringing it home. And I know what that feels like because a relationship doesn't work that way, or a conversion experience is not that neat, or arguments don't happen, whatever it is. So, knowing what your audience uh, and who they are and what they want helps you set guardrails around your story. Years back, I read a book called Thickening the Plot, and think it was called that. Anyhow, the author made this one example in the opening paragraphs, the opening chapters, where he says, imagine if your story was intended to bring some delight to a character and maybe, or to a reader, and maybe this reader is some child coming out of surgery stuck alone in a hospital. And you could write a story that would inspire them to just forget everything and escape into a wonderful world of other possibilities and hopeful things. And that inspired me for ages. And so that would be the kind of person I would be writing for. Maybe because I kind of felt trapped in my life and I couldn't get out and I couldn't make enough friends. And so I would escape into stories as well. Knowing that that was the kind of person I was writing for automatically kind of meant I sort of guessed or intuited certain topics I'm not going to go into. There's a certain vibe that I want to honor and I want to hew to and keep with. Um, so it's not just, again, to wrap up, it's not just about what does the market want? Um, what are the conventions of the genre? That all helps too. But if you can decide the kind of person who's really going to love this story, and it might be totally you, somebody who's going through this and these experiences in life, and I want a story that's going to resonate with them. Um, and then we may end up being surprised that there are a whole lot of other people out there who are just like that, who are just like us. So starting with a sense of who your audience is and who you want to connect your story to is, I find, one of the best ways to honor where you want the story to go. It can probably help with a whole lot of rewrites, and help with a whole lot of editing. I'm sure this is exactly what I do too. You just write a story just to get it out, to find out what it is that you want to tell, and to find out who your character is, because you can't totally see them until you get through the whole experience. And then they reveal themselves to you. And at that point, you have a sense of, oh, this is what I was writing. I thought it was this. Now I know it's this, which means perhaps this is a specific kind of audience who will really get this. And then that means that you go back and then you can re-edit and provide better clarity. So I'm very curious to invite you as we go into the breakouts, share what you think, who it is you're writing for, and why you think it might matter. What's an audience that the story that you're writing right now, if you were to pick a specific audience, who might that be and why?